Okay, so we're here with Feli Deane. She is a junior at Boston College, and she is amazing that she's doing a triple major in economics, political science, and in theology. And she did a fellowship with the Center for Christian Jewish Learning, where she worked with me on this. And the topic was for the final paper that she wrote, Catholic Indifference in the Jewish Community in Argentina, which really ended up, I think, just being a fascinating study. So, Feli, why don't you just start off with telling us what interested you in this project, or where did you first get the inkling to do this kind of project?
So my father actually was living a few blocks away from the Israeli embassy, which was where the first sort of attack happened. And so growing up, I had always heard stories of just his experience being a few blocks away. But what truly got me into the project was that when I was 16, an uncle of mine, he's an architect who I actually interviewed, just told me about working on a project to help build a community center and temple.
Hmm. So this was sort of a part of a family narrative that then you decide you want to explore a little bit more. Yeah, that's really great. So this paper really begins with looking at the presence of Jews in Argentina and begins with some of that history. So can you just tell us a little bit more about when did Jews begin to arrive in Argentina and what were those first several generations like for them as they're building their community?
Right. Um, well, since Argentina was a Spanish colony, they were apparently not allowed in during the colonial era. So it was really around the 18th century, thanks to the abolition of these laws, that they were finally allowed to arrive. And by around 1888, there were 1,500 Jewish individuals in the country, mostly living in agricultural communities.
Mm, mm. And were they coming from Europe or from parts of the Arab world, or where were they arriving from?
Most from Europe,
Mhm.
because these were initiatives from European Jewish philanthropists who wanted to sort of give people escaping difficult situations a sort of a new home in Argentina.
Right, right. And you talk about you developed this really great kind of frame for thinking about the Jewish experience in Argentina. You use this concept of indifference. And so, how was indifference a characteristic of Argentinian cultural attitudes towards Jews? Are there some examples of this, and are there some ways you saw this develop over the 19th and 20th century?
Yes, so it was a to me it was a more striking aspect because I just saw it throughout my research. I would just saw it sort of remain a constant in sort of the Jewish experience of being an Argentine and living in Argentina. Um, I mean, it depends really on the era we're discussing.
Hmm.
The 1800s, there was no outright rejection, but it was sort of an alienation, a lack of representation in government. Um,
Hmm.
the infamous decade, which was between 1930 and 1943, there was the establishment of mandatory Catholic education in public schools, which was later abolished, but this was obviously sort of a slight, of
Hmm.
course. And then, I mean, more recently, newspaper reports during the aftermath of the AMIA attack in
Hmm.
1994 um, would talk about sort of the number of Jewish deaths and innocent deaths. So we just see this sort of distinction, a sort of
Hmm.
way in which Jewish people were being treated in Argentina as non-Argentine.
Hmm. Hmm. And just to develop this indifference thing a little bit, you note how in your study how Argentina is both a liberal democracy and also an officially Catholic country. Um, so, did you have any examples of how Catholic attitudes towards Jews existed during this time period that you're living in ways that maybe there's an Argentinian dimension to some of those attitudes?
Well, I know from my research that the Catholic Church, they weren't outright rejecting the Jewish community. I mean, there was perhaps a lack of acknowledgement that they were part of the country and their
Mhm.
identity was sort of connected to the Catholic identity. But there were many reports I got close to the Second Vatican Council in 1950s, around that era, where catechisms and like catechism newspapers, for
Mhm.
example, would report on blood libel stories. So there was this
Mhm.
story about a Catholic Christian child being kidnapped by evil Jewish people who wanted to sort of murder him for some sort of ritual. And it was
Mhm.
basically a sort of recreation or accusation that Jews were Christ killers. Just
Mhm.
very vile stuff that was being sort of passed around and sadly taught in schools around this time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so that sounds like that mirrors a lot of kind of just general Catholic attitudes towards Jews that were largely unexamined. But then do you have a sense that with the Second Vatican Council and the document Nostra Aetate that initiated some developments in Catholic attitudes towards Jews in Argentina?
I talk about it in my essay. I sort of address the fact that it was kind of acknowledged. I mean, the Second Vatican Council certainly wanted to sort of eliminate this discrimination against Jews.
Hmm.
The way the sort of Argentine Catholic community took it, especially like authority figures, they sort of took the Vatican Council in a different route. They started doing more social work with the poor, and religious differences were not as addressed as
Hmm.
so societal and economic issues.
Right, right. So those kind of, yeah, those issues of Catholic social teaching the Second Vatican Council amplified were pursued a little bit more, which maybe goes again to speak to some of this disposition of indifference that you identify as well. Good. And so, as you already mentioned, your paper goes into a second half, which is investigating these two terror attacks that occurred in Buenos Aires. First, the 1992 attack on the Israeli embassy, and then more consequentially, the 1994 bombing of the Jewish Community Center, there known as the AMIA bombing. Can you just say a little bit more about what these attacks were, their significance? Did one inform the consciousness of the country a little bit more than the other?
So the first one was the 1992 attack was on the Israeli embassy. This was, of course, shocking. I wouldn't say Argentina has a very violent terrorist history, especially not against the Jewish community. I feel like this was perhaps the first large attack or terrorist
Mhm.
attack against the Argentine Jewish community. But people were less, I think, struck by it just because of the political nature of the just Middle Eastern conflict and the fact that the Israeli embassy is technically Israeli soil in within Argentina. And so people sort of chalked the attack to being a political statement aimed to simply harm Israel rather than an attack on Argentine Jews themselves.
Mhm. And then what about the EMEA bombing? What was that, and what was some of the aftermath of that event?
Uh, of course, the EMEA attack, there were more casualties, so this perhaps made it more striking, although I don't feel like it should take away from the Israeli embassy and the fact that people did indeed die in the attack on the Israeli embassy. But it was a community center.
Hmm.
Uh, the Amia was a community center. The terrorist attack was not on Israeli soil, so it wasn't as easy to explain away. This was an Argentine soil, and Argentine Jews were being attacked, and people on the streets were also victims of the attack as well. And I think what was also most striking, apart from just the large amount of casualties, sadly, was that there were many political scandals that sort of came from this case, and there was never any justice accomplished. It's just a sort of rabbit hole where the judges were corrupt and the government was accused of being corrupt and there was really never any justice. And so it sort of created a just an environment of mistrust with authorities
Hmm.
and a lack of closure, perhaps.
Hmm. And do you think that's indicative of some of this disposition of indifference that you identified?
Well, I think one of the most fascinating points and sort of like opened me up to the idea of these attacks being purposefully perpetrated in Argentina was something Rabbi Kreiman said. She said that the attacks perhaps didn't have much to do with Argentina. It is
Hmm.
believed that they came mainly from terrorists or organizations in the Middle East, but the fact that they were done in Argentina and two attacks so close together very much has to do with this sort of impunity or failure of the justice system and authorities in Argentina to sort of address the issue. And I think this is rooted on just this idea of indifference and really not caring to find justice and not feeling that the Israeli embassy, the attack on the Israeli embassy was personal, and this leading to a much larger attack in the community center.
Right, right. So yeah, you mentioned Rabbi Kreiman as one of the people that you interviewed for your research. Um, can you tell me a little bit about who she is, why she's significant for your recounting of this event?
Well, Rabbi Claudia Kreiman is a rabbi at a temple near Boston College. She's from Chile, so we shared a lot of just being from South America. It was
Hmm.
just really lovely to sort of share what we had in common with our upbringings. She was extremely kind and knowledgeable, and she's dedicated much of her career to engaging in interfaith dialogue, which I found extremely inspiring. She lost her mother in the 1994 bombing of the Yamia, and her experience in the year following her mother's death is heartbreaking. And I think simultaneously for her is this like experience is sort of where she got the strength to um, just like go down this path of interfaith dialogue and sort of truly want to engage with other communities and be a part of educating the broader public.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and how, and you're talking with her, how did her perspective help you think a little bit more about not just the Amia bombing, but also the where the place of Jews in Argentina was, or how a Jewish person in Argentina and the aftermath of that event thought about their place in Argentine society.
I think I sort of from the little anecdotes or the anecdotes she would tell me, I sort of got that she kind of felt that the general Argentine public, especially the Catholic sort of side, um, saw it as a very like foreign event. They really didn't take it. It was, of course, shocking,
Hmm.
but they really didn't take it as personally, perhaps, or they didn't feel it as deeply because they didn't really feel like they were a part of the Jewish community, which had ultimately been the target of the attack.
Hmm.
And I think she did feel this sort of distance. She felt the frustration with the lack of justice. I mean, something she, like an example she gave was of just like the overall treatment that the public had towards the victims of the Amia.
Hmm.
Um, I remember her telling me she went to present her mother's death certificate. It was sort of this like process they had to go through. And she goes up to the person at the office where she had to present the certificate, and the person asks her how her mother died. And she said, "Oh, in the attack." And the person says, "Oh, I thought only Israelites died in the attack."
Hmm. Hmm.
And so for her, this sort of epitomized or summarized her experience as being just an outsider or sort of
Right.
feeling like, yeah.
Yeah, they really lays bare the question of who's seen as belonging in that society. Yeah.
Yeah.
You also interviewed Enrique Lynch, who was an architect, and can you tell me a little bit about his story and what's significant in talking to him, reflecting on the EMEA bombing?
So Enrique Lynch he's an architect. He was hired, or his firm was hired, to design and oversee the construction of the Amichai community. So he was born and raised Catholic. He wasn't really exposed as much to the Jewish community's customs and religious practices. So just the way he narrates his experience of working hand in hand with the community to construct an artful and beautiful and simultaneously um, sort of intentionally constructed or security aware
Hmm.
temple was extremely interesting. Something I really value of like the way he tells his experience was just how how perhaps fascinated he was with discovering how much Catholicism shared with Judaism.
Hmm.
I remember him saying something like, "We have the same things; they're just called different names."
Right,
Um,
right. Yeah.
and so he was very fascinated by that, just like sharing so much and sort of feeling more sort of shared history and
Hmm.
closeness instead of otherness.
Right, right. And it's really striking that kind of an outside firm that's probably employed primarily Catholics is kind of employed to build this new synagogue and community center. What had to be different about the new construction compared to the previous existence of the community center there?
So the difference was this was a city block.
Hmm.
Just it was a large amount of, not a city block, but it was in the center of a city block.
Hmm.
Excuse me. And the it was rare because they had to like go through some processes to sort of get this project approved. They really wanted the community center, because this is a temple as well as a community center. They wanted it to sort of be protected from the street. So there's walls that surrounded the temple itself, which is the building that holds the most amount of people, um, is in the middle of the lot of the
Hmm.
place. And what faces the sort of the street is a smaller building, which is more of a community gathering space. And this was, he explained, for security reasons. If it were the case that an attack is perpetrated, the the bulk of the people would be in a less sort of endangered space, which would be the temple. And so less people would sort of suffer from the attack
Right.
in this outside building.
Right. Yeah, so that really shows the kind of new realities of safety measures that the community had to take on. And yet at the same time, it sounds like Lynch really was part of a very thoughtful team about designing the inside, and thinking about the design of the temple was sort of transformative for him as well. What lessons do you think we can draw from that kind of personal experience and this kind of individual encounter between a Catholic and the Jewish community?
I think, I mean, I can speak for myself personally and sort of what I get from his experience and what he learned. Um, just working hands-on, engaging in perhaps more casual dialogue. I wouldn't say humanizing. I feel like we should always, of course, humanize other people. But I would say it brings a certain sort of closeness and more organic friendship
Hmm.
that allows us to sort of understand and enjoy each other's differences. I think this is what he kind of gathered from his experience,
Right.
was just how much he enjoyed and how enriching he felt learning from another community and a different perspective was for him.
Hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like what the Catholic Church has called the dialogue of everyday life. that those kind of encounters, and we'll build other things like doing work together or greater mutual understanding. So just for a final reflection, what are some insights you feel like you've gained from working on this paper? Not just about, say, Argentina or Jews in Argentina, but are there other things you think are insights that anyone could draw from this sort of work as well?
I think from Rabbi Kreiman's story of loss, and the sort of inspiration that came from uh, like that came from this loss and sort of the determination to engage with other communities and promote dialogue and respect is extremely admirable. Um, of course, she is a figure or a head of her community, so this isn't perhaps a reality for most people like myself who are just normal people who really want to engage and get to know others.
Mm-hmm.
So I find myself perhaps relating more to Lynch's work.
Hmm.
It's more of a blueprint for the kind of cross-cultural collaboration that turns indifference into understanding,
Hmm.
and just how building spaces together, perhaps literally, perhaps figuratively, allows us to sort of stop seeing people as others and sort of recognizing our that we share our humanity.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's really an amazing kind of way in which you built up this narrative to as this testimony to both a real tragedy, but also perhaps a more hopeful future as well. Is there anything else you want to just add as we conclude?
I think I'm okay.
Good, good. Well, I think this was a really fun project to work with you on as your advisor for this, and just really pleased with the learning you've helped develop for yourself and also as a resource for others. So thank you very much.
Thank you.